Arinze, the first son of Chizaram and Somadina, grew up to be the very image of his father in his youth. Tall, strikingly handsome, and brimming with an ego that mirrored Somadina's own. His dark skin glowed with health, his sharp jawline and piercing eyes, commanding attention wherever he went. But beneath his captivating exterior lay the same entitlement and arrogance that Chizaram had fought tirelessly to shield him from. Chizaram had always hoped to raise Arinze to be different from his father. She taught him to be kind, to share, and to value humility. She made him help his younger siblings with their chores, hoping to instill a sense of responsibility and respect for others, but Somadina would have none of it. Whenever Somadina saw Chizaram encouraging Arinze to do household tasks, his temper flared. One evening, Chizaram had asked Arinze to sweep the compound. He reluctantly picked up the broom, grumbling under his breath, when Somadina walked in. "What is this nonsense?" Soma barked, his voice echoing through the compound. Chizaram froze, turning to face her husband. "I'm just teaching him responsibility, Soma," she said cautiously. "Responsibility?" Somadina scoffed, his face twisting with disdain. "A man's responsibility is to provide for his family, not sweep the ground like a woman. Stop filling his head with this foolishness." Arinze smirked, dropping the broom and crossing his arms. The look on his face broke Chizaram's heart, but she held her tongue, knowing that any argument would only make things worse. Determined not to give up, Chizaram began training her children in secret. When Somadina was away, she taught her sons and daughters to work together, to respect one another, and to value the strength in humility. The younger children, Obina, Amaka, Kelechi, and Ifeanyi, absorbed these lessons eagerly. They adored their mother and mimicked her gentleness. But Arinze was different. His bond with his father was strong, and he idolized Somadina's domineering ways. No matter how much Chizaram tried to guide him, he dismissed her lessons as woman talk. One afternoon, Chizaram was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard the sound of her daughters crying. She rushed outside to find Amaka and Kelechi huddled together, tears streaming down their faces. "What happened?" she asked, kneeling to comfort them. "Mommy," Amaka sobbed, "Arinze hit me and took my doll. I told him I wasn't done playing with it, but he grabbed it and pushed me. And he broke my toy," Kelechi added, his voice trembling with anger. Chizaram's heart sank. She turned to find Arinze sitting under the mango tree, smugly holding the toys. Her frustration boiled over. Marching up to him, she snatched the toys from his hands. "Arinze, how many times have I told you to stop bullying your siblings?" she said, her voice firm. "They wouldn't share," he snapped, his defiance mirroring Somadina's. "That doesn't mean you can take what you want by force," Chizaram retorted. "You'll never grow up to be a good man if you keep this up." She disciplined him then, grounding him and taking away his privileges. But Arinze wasn't one to take punishment quietly. The moment Somadina returned that evening, Arinze bolted to his father's side, tears streaming down his face. "Papa," Arinze cried, clutching Somadina's arm. "Mommy punished me for playing with my sisters. I just wanted to join them, but they refused, so I took the toys. She hit me." Somadina's expression darkened, his gaze snapping to Chizaram. "Is this true?" he demanded. Chizaram, weary from the day's battles, tried to explain. "Soma, he wasn't playing. He bullied his siblings and broke their toys. I had to—" "You had to what?" Soma thundered, cutting her off. "He's a man. If he wants something, he should have it. When I'm not here, he's the head of this house. How dare you punish him?" Before Chizaram could respond, Somadina's rage boiled over. He grabbed her by the arm, dragging her into the house. "You'll learn to respect the men in this family," he growled. The beating that followed left Chizaram bruised and broken, but the emotional wounds cut even deeper. As she lay on the floor, clutching her aching ribs, she heard Arinze laughing outside with his siblings, triumphant in his father's validation. This pattern continued over the years. Arinze grew bolder, his arrogance fed by his father's constant reinforcement. He dismissed his mother's teachings entirely, viewing them as weak and unimportant. Meanwhile, his siblings grew closer to Chizaram, learning to value the quiet strength she displayed in the face of adversity. Chizaram watched helplessly as Arinze transformed into a younger version of Somadina. The boy who had once clung to her skirts now mirrored the very man who had made her life a living nightmare. Her heart ached with the knowledge that she had failed to shield him from the toxicity that surrounded them. But deep down, she clung to a sliver of hope that one day Arinze might see the truth for himself and break free from the cycle of dominance and violence that had consumed their family. Until then, she continued to fight in the only way she knew how, with love, patience, and unwavering resilience. Arinze grew into a young man who embodied dominance and intimidation. His towering figure and piercing gaze made him an imposing presence, and his reputation as a tyrant extended beyond his household. At the slightest provocation, he lashed out at his siblings, his fists and words leaving lasting marks on their bodies and spirits. His sisters and brothers learned to tiptoe around him, avoiding his wrath at all costs. The younger children often whispered among themselves, wishing for a day when Arinze would leave home. Even the sight of him approaching sent them scurrying to hide. His power within the family was absolute, unchecked by their father, who only fueled his arrogance by encouraging his behavior. Despite his behavior, Arinze was celebrated in the village as the most eligible bachelor. His father's wealth, coupled with his striking looks and commanding demeanor, made him the subject of every young woman's dreams. Mothers schemed to catch his attention for their daughters, and fathers viewed him as a prized son-in-law who could elevate their family's status. Even the whispers about how he treated his siblings did little to deter the admiration. For many of the women, wealth and status outweighed any character flaws. Better to cry in a mansion than to cry in poverty, they said to themselves, turning a blind eye to the warning signs. Among the many women vying for Arinze's attention was Nychi, a strikingly beautiful young woman with a glowing light complexion and elegant features. She came from a wealthy family and carried herself with an air of confidence and entitlement. Nychi had always envisioned marrying a man who was not only wealthy, but also prestigious. Someone who could give her a life even grander than the one her father provided. To her, Arinze was the pinnacle of her aspirations. His reputation didn't faze her. She convinced herself that his arrogance was simply a sign of strength. She believed that she, of all women, was uniquely capable of making him fall madly in love with her. Nychi began to subtly yet deliberately flaunt herself in Arinze's path. She wore her finest clothes, adorned herself with intricate jewelry, and always made sure her presence was felt at any gathering he attended. Her beauty was undeniable, and her determination to capture his attention eventually paid off. One day, Arinze's eyes lingered on Nychi longer than usual. Her graceful movements, coupled with her bold yet charming demeanor, piqued his interest. Nychi seized the opportunity, making sure to always be within reach, flashing her radiant smile whenever he glanced her way. Though Arinze remained dismissive and arrogant in his approach, his growing interest in Nychi was evident. He made it clear that she was fortunate to have caught his attention, often speaking to her in a tone that bordered on condescension. But Nychi didn't mind. She told herself that once he got to know her, he would see her worth and fall deeply in love. Arinze began courting Nychi in his own way. He didn't shower her with affection or words of endearment, but instead relied on grand gestures. He bought her luxurious fabrics imported from distant lands, sparkling jewelry that shimmered under the sun, and other extravagant gifts. Nychi was instantly swept off her feet, the glitter of the gifts overshadowing any doubts she might have had. She ignored the red flags, his dismissive tone, the way he ordered his siblings around, and the stories she had heard about his cruelty at home. He's just misunderstood, she told herself. Once we're married, he'll change. Back at the family compound, Arinze's siblings watched the courtship unfold with mixed emotions. They were well aware of their brother's flaws, but the news of his impending marriage brought them relief. Arinze was moving out, and their father, Somadina, was building a mansion for him that rivaled his own. It'll finally be peaceful here, Amaka whispered to Kelechi as they helped prepare for the wedding. I hope he never comes back, Kelechi replied, his voice filled with quiet resentment. Despite their lingering bitterness, the siblings threw themselves into the wedding preparations, eager to speed up the process and ensure Arinze's departure. The wedding day was a spectacle like no other. Guests from far and wide gathered to witness the union of the most eligible bachelor and one of the wealthiest young women in the village. Nychi dazzled in her bridal attire, her beauty enhanced by the finest beads and fabrics. She was the envy of every woman present. Arinze stood tall and proud, his confidence radiating as he exchanged vows with Nychi. To the villagers, it was the perfect match, two families of immense wealth and influence coming together. After the wedding, Arinze took Nychi to their new home, a sprawling mansion with high ceilings, intricate carvings, and luxurious furnishings. The house was a masterpiece, designed to showcase the family's wealth and power. When Nychi stepped inside, she was left speechless. The grandeur of her new home exceeded her wildest dreams. "I've made the right choice," she told herself, her heart swelling with pride. "This is the life I was meant to live." The sight of the mansion solidified her belief that any sacrifices she made were worth it. She chose to ignore the whispers of doubt that lingered at the edges of her mind, focusing instead on the glittering life she had stepped into. The early days of Nychi's marriage to Arinze were like a dream come true. Arinze, who had a reputation for being dismissive and arrogant, treated her with a tenderness that surprised even herself. He showered her with affection, listening to her every word and indulging her smallest whims. He brought her gifts and ensured she lacked nothing in their grand home. Nychi basked in this newfound love and luxury, marveling at how different Arinze seemed from the man people gossiped about. "They don't know him the way I do," she thought to herself, smiling as she admired her reflection in the mirror. "He just needed the right woman to teach him what love is." She dismissed the stories of how he treated his siblings, rationalizing them as exaggerated tales. Perhaps they provoked him, she mused. Besides, he's their elder brother. He has the right to discipline them however he sees fit. Back in the family compound, Arinze's siblings finally began to breathe. Without his looming presence, their lives became freer and more relaxed. They laughed more, spent time together without fear of his interference, and even began to rebuild their strained relationships. But their father, Somadina, remained a figure of terror. His temper and rigid rules kept them wary, and they avoided him as much as possible. Somadina, ever the patriarch, distributed land and trading posts to his sons, preparing them for independent lives. As expected, Arinze received the lion's share of the family's wealth, a vast expanse of fertile land and the most lucrative trading post. The other sons received smaller portions, but they accepted their lot without complaint. The daughter, however, received nothing. It was Somadina's belief that women were outsiders who would eventually leave the family, so they were not entitled to any inheritance. Chizaram's heart ached for her daughter, but she knew better than to protest. Despite this, Chizaram remained determined to secure a bright future for her daughter, Amaka. The young girl's beauty had begun to attract the attention of suitors, and with Chizaram's guidance, Amaka chose a humble but hard-working trader as her husband. Her brothers, apart from Arinze, saw the potential in Amaka's husband and pooled their resources to invest in his business. Over time, he became very comfortable, expanding his trade and providing Amaka with a life of stability and love. Amaka's happiness brought Chizaram immense joy, though her own life was marked by sorrow and hardship. Knowing that her daughter had found peace and love gave her hope. She often visited Amaka, her heart swelling with pride at the life her daughter was building. Somadina, meanwhile, remained as gruff and unyielding as ever. His treatment of Chizaram continued unabated, his sharp words and controlling nature making her life a constant struggle. Yet Chizaram endured, finding solace in the small victories, her children's growing independence, their successes, and most importantly, Amaka's happiness. These moments, though fleeting, gave her strength to face another day. Back in his own home, Arinze maintained his role as the seemingly perfect husband. He adored Nychi in public, holding her hand during community events and lavishing her with compliments. The villagers whispered enviously about her life, marveling at her beauty and her fortune in marrying the wealthiest and most handsome man in the area. Nychi, too, felt vindicated. "I made the right choice," she told herself. "He's a good man, and I'm the only one who truly understands him." But beneath the surface, Arinza's temper simmered. Though he had learned to mask it around Nychi, years of unchecked dominance had left their mark. He was used to being in control, and any disruption to his authority or plans was a blow to his pride. One evening, Arinz came home later than usual, his face a storm cloud of frustration. Nychi, who had just started preparing dinner, hurried to greet him with a bright smile. "You're back," she said, taking his bag. "Dinner's almost ready. I'm making your favorite, onugbu soup." Arinze didn't respond. He sat heavily on the couch, his hand running through his hair as he let out a long, exasperated sigh. "What's wrong?" Nychi asked, concern etching her features. "The traitors," he muttered, his voice low. "The fools importing my goods from the neighboring towns failed to deliver on time. Do you know how much money I've lost today? And the embarrassment? It's like they think I'm some common man they can cheat." Nychi hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm sorry, Arinze," she said gently. "Maybe it's just a delay. I'm sure they'll fix it soon." Arinze's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Just a delay? Do you know how much effort I put into that deal? Do you think this is some small matter?" Nychi stepped back, startled by the sharpness in his tone. "I didn't mean—" "Stop talking," he barked, his voice echoing through the house. For the first time, Nychi saw a glimpse of the temper she had ignored during their courtship. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine, but quickly pushed it aside. "It's just the frustration talking," she told herself. "He'll calm down." Arinze's sharp gaze swept across the room, lingering on the empty table. His voice, low and cold, broke the silence. "Where's my food?" he demanded, his tone cutting through the air like a blade. Nychi hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. "Arinze, I wasn't feeling well today," she began, her voice trembling. "I slept most of the day, and I didn't realize it was evening already. It's still on the—" Before she could finish, Arinze's face twisted with rage. His frustrations from the day erupted in an uncontrollable outburst. "You haven't cooked?" he thundered, his voice echoing through the house. "What kind of wife are you?" Nychi took a cautious step back, her hands instinctively shielding her growing belly. "Arinze, please." She tried to explain, but her words were cut short as he lunged at her. The first slap sent her reeling, her body slamming against the wall. Before she could regain her footing, his fists followed, each blow fueled by the anger he had bottled up all day. Nychi cried out in pain, her pleas for mercy drowned out by his shouting. "You lazy woman," he roared. "Do you think this house runs on excuses? You will learn to do your duty." When he finally stopped, Nychi lay curled on the floor, her body trembling from the pain. She thought it was over, but Arinze's voice sliced through the silence. "Get up," he commanded, pointing to the kitchen. "You'll make me fresh onugbu soup and pounded yam. Now." Nychi, too shocked to argue, dragged herself to her feet. Every movement was agony, but the fear of incurring more of Arinze's wrath propelled her forward. She stumbled into the kitchen, her hands trembling as she continues making the meal she was making. The pounding of the yam felt like an echo of her heart, each strike of the pestle a painful reminder of what her life had become. When she finally served the meal, Arinze ate in silence, his face devoid of any remorse. Nychi retreated to their room, her tears flowing freely as she curled up on the bed. The man she thought she knew, the man who had once lavished her with gifts and affection, had revealed a side of himself she had never imagined. That night marked the start of Nychi's suffering. Arinze's temper became a constant presence in their home, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. If dinner was late, if the house wasn't spotless, or if she simply looked at him the wrong way, his anger would erupt, and Nychi would bear the brunt of it. At first, she tried to reason with him, pleading for him to understand her condition as a pregnant woman, but her words only seemed to fuel his rage. "Don't use your pregnancy as an excuse," he sneered one evening after throwing a plate across the room. "Do you think you're the first woman to carry a child?" Desperate for help, Nychi turned to her father. She arrived at her family's home one afternoon, her face swollen and her body bruised. Her father, a proud man who had always spoken of protecting his family's honor, listened in silence as she recounted her ordeal. When she finished, he sighed heavily and said, "Nychi, you're a married woman now. If your husband is beating you, then stop doing whatever it is that makes him angry. A good wife knows how to keep her husband happy. Nychi stared at him in disbelief. But Papa, he beats me for no reason. I can't even... Enough, her father snapped. Do you know how much I received for your bride price? How much respect I've gained because of your marriage to Arinze? You think I'll let you ruin this family's reputation with your complaints? Go home and fix your marriage. Nychi left her father's house with a heavy heart, realizing she had no ally in him. Despite her pain, she returned to Arinze's house, hoping to find a way to endure. But when Arinze discovered she had spoken to her father, his fury knew no bounds. So you're going around the village, telling people I beat you, he sneered, his fists clenched. Do you know how much shame you're bringing to my name? The beating that followed left Nychi too afraid to speak out again. She withdrew from her friends and family, her once vibrant personality dimmed by the weight of her suffering. She learned to suppress her pain, putting on a brave face in public while silently enduring her torment at home. In her solitude, Nychi began to blame herself for her predicament. She replayed the early days of their courtship in her mind, remembering the red flags she had ignored. She recalled how Arinze treated his siblings and how she had convinced herself it wasn't a warning sign. I should have known, she whispered to herself, her tears soaking into her pillow. But I was blinded by his wealth and charm. Despite the constant abuse, Nychi's pregnancy progressed. Each time Arinze raised his hand, she prayed silently for the safety of her unborn child. Somehow, against all odds, her baby remained healthy. It was a small miracle, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark and unbearable reality. Nychi clung to that hope, believing that perhaps the arrival of her child might soften Arinze's heart. But deep down, she feared that the worst was yet to come. Nychi's pregnancy had reached its final stages, and with each passing day, her body grew heavier and her energy waned. On this particular morning, she was so exhausted that she couldn't summon the strength to get out of bed. Her head throbbed, her limbs felt like lead, and every movement sent waves of discomfort through her body. As dawn broke, Arinze prepared for work. When he didn't find his breakfast waiting on the table, his temper ignited like dry tinder. His footsteps thundered through the house as he stormed into the bedroom, his face twisted in anger. Nychi, he barked, standing over her. Why is my breakfast not ready? Nychi, her voice weak, tried to explain. Arinze, I'm sorry. I don't feel well today. I can barely move. Her words only fueled his rage. Don't you dare give me excuses, he yelled, grabbing her arm and pulling her upright. Get up this instant and do your duty as my wife. Nychi struggled to stand, her legs trembling beneath her. Arinze, please, she whispered, clutching the bedpost for support. I can't. I'm too weak. Her plea fell on deaf ears. Arinze's patience snapped, and he struck her across the face. Nychi staggered, but managed to stay upright. Before she could recover, he unleashed a barrage of blows, each one more forceful than the last. In his fury, he landed a punch on her stomach, sending her crumpling to the floor. She clutched her abdomen, a sharp pain radiating through her body as warm blood seeped onto the floor beneath her. Nychi lay motionless, her vision blurring as she drifted in and out of consciousness. But Arinze, unfazed and indifferent, merely straightened his shirt and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. That evening, Arinze returned home in a better mood. The day's work had gone well. Whistling softly, he opened the door, expecting to find Nychi waiting with dinner. Instead, the stench of dried blood assaulted his senses. His eyes fell on the dark, congealed pool of blood near the bedroom, and his heart raced. Muna, he called, his voice rising with each syllable. Nychi, where are you? He searched the house frantically, opening every door and checking every corner, but Nychi was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as he rushed outside, shouting her name into the night. Arinze's search eventually led him to his father-in-law's compound. His fists pounded on the gate until it swung open, revealing Nychi's father, standing with a confused expression. Where's Nychi? Arinze demanded, his voice frantic. Nychi's father frowned. What do you mean, where is she? Isn't she at home? She's gone, Arinze shouted. I came back and she wasn't there. At that moment, Nychi's mother stepped forward, her face a mask with surprise. "Arinze," she said, her voice calm. "What do you mean she's gone? I haven't seen her." Arinze searched their faces, looking for any hint of deceit, but they were genuinely unaware of what had transpired. "Perhaps she went to visit a friend," her father suggested. Arinze, filled with frustration and worry, stormed out of the compound to continue his search. Days turned into a blur of desperation for Arinze. After returning home to find Nychi gone, his world unraveled. He roamed the village endlessly, searching every corner, asking anyone who would listen if they had seen his wife. The dried bloodstains in his house haunted him, a grim reminder of his actions. "If she's dead, let me at least find her body," he muttered to himself, pacing the dusty streets. His sleepless nights were plagued by nightmares of Nychi's face, her eyes wide with fear and pain. The once proud man began to unravel, his arrogance replaced by a gnawing sense of loss and guilt. As the days passed with no sign of Nychi, something inside Arinze snapped. His restless mind turned inward, replaying every lesson his father, Somedina, had instilled in him since childhood. The belief that women were outsiders, meant only to serve and obey, loomed large in his thoughts. "This is his fault," Arinze whispered one evening, his voice trembling with rage. "He poisoned me with his beliefs. He taught me to treat women like this." The anger that had always defined him now had a new target. It built up inside him like a storm until it could no longer be contained. One fateful day, Arinze marched to his family compound, his eyes blazing with fury. Arinze burst into the family house, the door slamming against the wall with a deafening crash. His father, Somedina, sat in his usual chair, barking orders at Chizaram, who scurried about with a tray of food. The sight enraged Arinze further, the scene a stark reminder of the toxic cycle that had shaped his life. "You caused this," Arinze roared, pointing a trembling finger at his father. Somedina turned to him, frowning. "What are you talking about, boy? What nonsense is this?" "All these years," Arinze spat, his voice trembling with rage, "you taught me to treat women as nothing, as outsiders, as property. You made me believe that was what made a man, and now I've lost my wife because of it. Do you see what you've done?" Somedina's eyes narrowed. "Lost your wife? Don't blame me for your failures. If she left, it's because you weren't strong enough to keep her." That was the final straw. Arinze lunged at his father, his fists flying in a blind fury. The older man, though aged, was still strong and agile. He fought back, and the two men grappled, their movements a chaotic blur of rage and violence. Chizaram screamed in terror as she watched her son and husband brawl. She dropped the tray she was holding, the dishes shattering on the floor. "Help!" she cried, rushing out into the compound. "Somebody, please help! They're going to kill each other!" Villagers came running, their shouts adding to the chaos. By the time they entered the house, the scene before them was one of horror. Somedina lay on the ground, his body motionless, his head twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood pooled beneath him where he had struck his head on the edge of the table. Chizaram fell to her knees, wailing as she cradled her husband's lifeless body. Arinze stood frozen, his hands shaking as he whispered, "It was a mistake. I didn't mean to. It wasn't supposed to." But no one listened. The villagers dragged him out of the house, their faces grim as they marched him to the king's palace. Arinze's pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears. At the palace, the king listened to the villagers recount the events. He studied Arinze, whose once proud demeanor was now replaced by fear and regret. "You have committed a grave crime," the king said solemnly. "You have taken the life of your father, the man who brought you into this world. For this, you will be sentenced to life in the dungeon." Arinze didn't resist as he was led away to the dungeon, his mind swirling with the weight of his actions. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground beneath him were pulling him down. The image of his father's lifeless body haunted him, a stark reminder of the man he had become, an echo of the toxic legacy he had inherited and perpetuated. The silence of the dungeon became his only companion, amplifying the regret and anger that gnawed at him from within. Actually, what happened the day Nychi went missing was one of both terror and salvation. By sheer luck, her mother arrived just moments after the horrific incident. The sight of Nychi lying in a pool of her own blood was enough to stop her heart. The young woman was pale and motionless, her once vibrant face drained of life. "Muna! Muna, my child!" her mother screamed, rushing to her side. She knelt down, trembling as she checked for signs of life. Relief washed over her when she felt a faint pulse. Wasting no time, she wrapped Nychi in a cloth and, with the help of nearby villagers, carried her out of the house. Her decision was swift and resolute. Nychi needed to be somewhere safe, far from Arinze's wrath and the prying eyes of the village. She took her daughter to her maternal grandmother's house in a neighboring village, a secluded haven where healing and peace could be found. In the care of her grandmother, Nychi received the help of a skilled healer who worked tirelessly to save both her and her unborn child. Days turned into weeks, and Nychi slowly regained her strength. Despite the pain and trauma she had endured, she clung to one glimmer of hope, the life growing inside her. When her son was born, Nychi cradled him in her arms, tears streaming down her face. He was her second chance, her beacon of hope in a world that had shown her so much darkness. She vowed then and there to protect him from the cycle of violence and entitlement that had plagued her husband and his family. 6 months later, Nychi returned to the village with her newborn son in tow. She had spent the months at her grandmother's house, away from the chaos of her marriage. The whispers began the moment she stepped into the family compound. Faces turned, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, pity, and unease. It didn't take long for Nychi to learn the truth. Her husband, once the proud and domineering Arinze, was now rotting in a dungeon. Her father-in-law, Somadina, was dead, a victim of the very toxic legacy he had instilled in his son. The story of their family had become a cautionary tale, repeated in hushed tones across the village. Because she already had an heir to Arinze's lineage, Nychi was allowed to remain in the family house. The villagers, though sympathetic, kept their distance, unsure of how to approach the young widow with such a complicated past. Nychi, however, embraced her solitude. She focused entirely on raising her son, pouring into him the values of kindness and respect she had longed to see in her husband. She kept the memory of her suffering close, not as a burden, but as a reminder of what she'd survived and what she needed to protect her son from. She was determined to break the cycle of violence, to ensure that her son grew up to be a man who valued humanity over dominance. The legacy of the Somadina family, once rooted in dominance, became a reminder of the destructive power of hatred and the strength it takes to rebuild after breaking free. And so, Nychi found a fragile peace, knowing that though her life had been scarred, her son had a chance to grow up differently, away from the shadow of his father's sins. Thank you for staying with us till the end of the story. This story serves as a powerful reminder of the dangers of unchecked toxic beliefs and the importance of breaking harmful cycles. What are your thoughts on Arinze's downfall and the legacy of Soma's teachings? Let us know in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this story and want to see more captivating African folktales, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. And if this tale moved you, give the video a thumbs up and share it with someone who might enjoy it too. Thanks for watching African Folktales by Nychi. We'll see you soon with another story that will touch your heart and leave you thinking. Until next time, stay inspired.